I want to talk about Unreal's new gameplay camera system because I have a quick example set up here and I want to talk about it a little bit today. So we have this over-shoulder camera that I made real quick, and I can very seamlessly transition to a different normal third-person camera, which you can tell has a different post-processing effect on it. So we can set this kind of stuff up on a per camera basis very easily, and it interpolates between the post-processing and the non-post-processing very smoothly as well. And then I also have a first-person camera setup, and I can pretty seamlessly go between any of these modes by just pressing a couple of buttons. Of course, you can set up any trigger for these in your code however you want. So let's look into the gameplay camera system with an entirely empty project. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to go into plugins and you're going to look for gameplay cameras, of course, to make sure that it is enabled. It is technically labeled as an experimental plugin at the moment. It seems mostly to be stable from what I've seen with it, but it isn't technically production ready quite yet. After you've enabled it and restarted the engine, what we can do is we can come in here and have gameplay, and then we have assets and prefabs and variable collections. We'll go over the most important things, but for now, what we're going to do is we're going to make a camera asset. We have a couple of different options: a blueprint camera director, a priority queue camera director, a single camera director, and a state tree camera director. We're going to mostly be focusing on the blueprint camera director, but you can also make a single camera director, which is effectively just setting up rules for how a single camera would work. And you can also drive this with a state tree. Personally, I haven't looked too deep into that yet. I do want to look into it a little bit deeper because that seems like it could be really powerful. But for the most part, I think what you're going to want to look at is this blueprint camera director. So let's make one of those and call that simple cam director player, or something along those lines. And then when we open this up, we can see a interface here that includes our list of camera setups. And this is going to be all the different camera perspectives and rule sets that you want to be able to switch back and forth between. So let's set this up to have a third-person camera. And then you can also start adding things like the first-person camera and maybe something like a top-down camera. If you're making like a shooter, you could have a specific like zoomed in on the gun type of camera. There's a lot of things that you can do here. We're going to stick with these three examples. These are also the three examples that you'll be able to find on Unreal's own documentation example website. But you're able to do a lot of interesting stuff with this. So how do we set these up? Well, we can just kind of set up rules here. By default, you'll only be able to set in like one rule, which you can look at through like this toolbox. These are all the pre-existing nodes, functions that you can use. So you have things like attaching the thing to a player, and you have something like adding a offset. Most of the time, what you're going to do though, first is add in a sequence node because you're going to want to set up multiple rules for this thing to follow. Very often, that's going to come with using a boom arm. A boom arm isn't quite the same as you might be used to in the normal third-person example, where it is kind of a thing that rotates around a point and also like provides collision feedback. This boom arm doesn't provide collision feedback necessarily. For that, you have the collision push function, which we'll show in a moment. This is only going to rotate your camera around a center point at a certain distance based on your control rotation. So that's the first thing that we're going to do, of course. And we can set up the boom offset here. I'm going to set this to -500 and then 50. So that it's lined up a little bit better to the player. But you can expose this as a variable, which we will do in a moment. Do note that I put the -500 in the wrong axis. It needs to be in the x-axis, -500 and then 0 and then about 50 or 60 in the height. Then you can set a offset from that, of course, if you want to. We're not going to do that. We are going to instead add a field of view node, which I assume is pretty self-evident as to what it does. It's just that's the field of view of the camera. Then I want to add a dampen position node. This is kind of just the same thing that on a normal boom arm that you might be used to using. This will be called camera lag. This is effectively just moving more smoothly in and out when your character starts moving, so that it's all a little bit easier on the eyes. And then lastly, we're going to add these collision push to make sure that it never clips through any geometry or anything like that. Now, for the dampen position, I'm going to set this to a value of 5. And this is the speed at which it will move along. So if we set this to a very low number, it's actually going to very slowly move, and it's going to not be able to keep up with the character. If you set this too high, it will be very instant. It might take a little trial and error to figure out what numbers feel good here. And you, of course, have a separate forward dampening, lateral dampening, and vertical dampening, in case those need to be separate values. Then collision push you can kind of just keep as is. You can give it an offset. You can set a custom safe position so that if it is clipping through something, it'll just go to that custom position instead. All that kind of good stuff. But for now, we're just going to keep it with the default settings because that works well enough. If we do that, we try to build this. First and foremost, it's going to complain that we don't have anything set up in the first person and top-down cameras. We'll do that in a moment. For now, the way that we can prevent that from being a compiling issue is just adding in an empty sequence to both of those, and it will stop complaining at us. It will, however, complain that we don't have an evaluator blueprint class. So if we go into the director here, we will see that the camera director evaluator class is empty, and we don't have any. So let's make a new blueprint. We'll just call that camera evaluator PP. Just going to put that in the content root folder. And when we make that, we get activate camera director and deactivate camera director as functions that we can add in. And by default, we have this event run camera director. This is effectively just the equivalent of event tick on this thing. This is going to constantly be running, so anything that constantly needs to be updated will need to be put in here. But for now, we just need this blueprint to be filled out in here so that we can build this, and now we have our camera rig setup. Next up, we can go into the transitions. Every single one of these camera rigs has its enter transitions and its exit transitions. You can build this out in a very complex way, almost making it like a state machine, almost. For the time being, what we're going to do is we're just going to get a exit transition, for which we can set up a condition if we wanted to. So if we are going from a particular camera rig, we might want to set up a different transition. Or you can see if we have a certain gameplay tag, so previous gameplay tag or the next gameplay tag, we can query that and do a different transition based on that. We're just going to keep the conditions empty for now and stick with simple linear interpolation, but you can really build this out quite a lot. And then we can choose whether or not we do a linear blend or an orbit blend, a pop blend. Smooth blend is just a smoothed out transition between the two cameras. And of course, we also have entry transitions that effectively work the same way. We can give it conditions and we can say what type of blending that we want to do, in case we want to like code that in on the entry side and not the exit side instead. For now, we're just going to copy over the very simple smooth blend, and that's kind of everything there is to it for all three of these. And we'll also go back around to doing the first person camera and the top down camera in a moment. I first want to go into our actual character blueprint and put in this third person character that we have now made. So let's go ahead and open up our third person blueprint. And in there, you can see in a moment when it opens up that we have this camera boom and follow camera. This is just what the template comes with. We're going to get rid of that. Both of these are going to go. Instead, we'll be adding a gameplay camera. So we can get this gameplay camera component, which starts at 000, that's fine. And we can give in the camera asset that we made with our rigs inside of it. We can auto-activate this so that it starts on begin play. Auto-activate on which player, that will be player 0. And now this camera will be the thing that player 0 looks through at begin play. And then coming off event run camera director, we simply activate a camera rig, and then we can choose whatever camera rig we want. So I'm going to go with third person, of course. So now you can see we effectively have our third person camera perspective with a little bit of dampening. So when we start moving and we stop moving, the camera catches up to us a little bit so that it's a little bit smoothed out. But this effectively is just a third person camera. That's a little bit more far away than maybe we would like, but we can change that if we really need to. So now how do we set up these other cameras and how do we change between them? Well, that's actually at this point fairly straightforward. So let's open up this thing that we have over here and set up our first person camera, because that's very straightforward. We're going to also be using a boom arm and then a field of view. I'm going to set the field of view for the first person camera to be a little bit bigger, so something like 115. And then the boom arm for this one, which is going to set to being about 50 units in front of our character, and then about 50 units to the top, so that it's about at head height. And this is all that there is to it. This is how easily we can set up a quick first person view. Now, a top-down camera, also relatively straightforward. We can do another boom arm. A lot of the things that you're going to do are going to rely on the boom arm, because it's just a very nice and flexible way to position your camera. This one we're going to set to be like 500 units up top, and then maybe about minus 50 units, so that's about 50 units back from our character. We can set a field of view for that as well. Maybe this also wants to be like 100, a little bit wider than 90. We can use a bit of dampened position for this as well. Let's just do like 5, 5, and 5 for all of these. And then for this one, what I'm going to do is I also want to make an occlusion material. And you'll see what that is in a moment. It's actually fairly straightforward. It will be the material that meshes use when they occlude our player character. So we can give in a material here, occlusion transparency material. So let's make a material real quick and just call that like OCC for occlusion. Probably give it a better name than I did, to be fair. And set that to translucent. And for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this like a dark gray at about 20% opacity. So it'll look a little something like this. You can, of course, make any type of shader for this that you want. Maybe like 35% opacity even would be fine, to be honest. Feel free to be more creative with whatever material you come up with, maybe some kind of like dithering solution or whatever. But once we've made that, we can use that occlusion material. And now, whenever our character is behind a mesh, that mesh will be given this material so that we can still see it. That's entirely built in with the gameplay camera system, which is quite nice. And just like that, we have 3 different cameras, which all have their own position and to a certain extent all different behavior as well. So now how do we switch between these? Well, in any way that you like, really. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just do this very easily on the blueprint player character itself. I'm going to make a variable for the camera index, and that's just going to be a integer. And we'll do that on debug key 1, 2, and 3. So debug key 2 and 3. And we'll just set this cam index to 0 on pressing 1, to 1 on pressing 2, and to 3, or to 2 when pressing 3. You kind of get that point, right? We set this to a value that we can use elsewhere. Maybe ideally, if you're setting up a more robust system, this could be like an enum that drives this instead for the time being. And you also probably wouldn't drive it with debug keys 1, 2, and 3, obviously. And then instead of just setting it to third person, what we can do is we can find a function called find evaluation context owner actor. So this is going to get the actor that is the owner of whatever this camera component will be. And we can even set what class we expect that to be. So in this case, that would be our BP third person character. Kind of to just automatically cast it into the right type. meaning that we can now get the cam index variable that we made. And from there, we can fairly easily make a switch statement on that, where we can just give a couple of values, so 0, 1, and 2. If it is 0, we're going to go for the third person character. That'll be our default. Then when we press 1, or when it becomes 1, we're going to go into first person. So we hook that up like this. And then we'll go into top down when we go and set that index to being 2. Again, ideally, maybe make this into a enum instead. But for now, a integer index will work fine. There's one last thing that we do need to do, however, and that is this camera rig top down will still be susceptible to having your mouse input, because our third person character here on the look event adds controller yaw and pitch inputs, which will kind of mess things up a little bit because it is using this boom arm, which will move when the rotation for the inputs changes. So either we can prevent ourselves from changing the input at all when this specific, well, the top-down camera is active, or what we can do is, because this runs every frame anyway, if we're using the top-down camera, what we can do is we already have this reference to our player character, so we can get its controller and we can set its control rotation to being a specific number. So in this case, that might be something like the pitch being set to like -80, so that it is slightly more top down. Now, whenever we change this, it's going to get hard set to this value every frame anyway, so we effectively still can't change it. So let's test that out. We can play, and we have our third person character. When I press 2, we go into our first person view mode. I can go back into the third person if I want to, and then when I press 3, we go into this top-down view, which has the values. That's entirely my fault, though. And then these can be either 0, 0. You can add a little bit of offset to them, like honestly, whatever you prefer. But we're gonna go -500, 0, 0 for this, and that will fix it so that we have our top-down view, which has a slight angle to it because we set it to -80 instead of minus 90 degrees. And we can fairly easily go back to our first person view, and then our third person view, our top down view. With the way we have it set up now, there's one little issue that is just inherent to the way that we've coded this, and that is we do have these nice smooth transitions between like first person and second person. But there's one issue, and that is if we are in pretty much any of these and we go to the top down, there is a hard cut, because the moment we go into top down, it sets our control rotation, so our camera perspective as well, to being that hard coded 80-degree angle that we programmed in. Transitioning away from top down back into what we already had, or if we already are at like that 80-degree angle or so, it is pretty decent, but it just kind of hard cuts to that angle. And that's kind of a issue with hard coding that control rotation value. But there's also nothing much you can do about that if you want that control rotation to specifically always be that hard coded value, aside from maybe interpolating it in your own code on the blueprint itself. Or, and this is what really becomes kind of awesome, you can go and make your entire own tool that we want. So we have this toolbox here. We have a blueprint option that can run arbitrary code. So we could very much make our own thing to execute here. And in that, we can, on camera take node, we can write any code that we want. So maybe this will be a node that instead of setting our control rotation to being whatever it is, will interpolate always back to that control rotation. Might come with some other issues, but at that point you're getting into like just general programming, problem solving. That's not really what this tutorial is about, obviously. But you can effectively do whatever you want in here. You can just find the evaluation context owner, just like we did before. And with that, we can start like setting its control rotation, getting values from it, setting values to it, whatever we want, really. So that is the basic setup that we have going here. You can do a lot of other things with this as well. In any of these, we could very much promote these to parameters. So if you just pull off of any of these pins, we can create a parameter, which we can then set from Blueprint. So right now we're in the first person mode, so that's actually maybe not the best example if we go to third person for an example. Pull off of this, create a rig parameter. Now boom offset is a parameter for this specific camera rig. So if we go back into the third person character and we do a debug numpad plus and debug numpad minus, we can start doing stuff like getting our gameplay camera. From that, we can get the initial variable table. So that's the variable table for this gameplay camera specifically. And with that, we can set a camera rig parameter. We can choose the rig that we want to set something on. So we first choose the assets, then we want to choose the rig, and it automatically, if we choose the right rig, will start populating this node with the right values. So in this case, what we can do is just quickly make a boom length, make that into a float, set the default value to about -500. Now when we press the plus key, we add 100 to it, and when we press the minus key, we just take 100 away from it. So we get the boom length, we do plus 100, and we set that, and we get a -100, and we set it on the other key. And then just to be sure, we want to like clamp this float between, let's say, 0 and -1000. And of course, technically, 1000 negative will be the minimum, and then the maximum will be, let's say, -100 instead. I kind of got mixed up there with absolute values. And that's then going to go into, let's check to be sure, the first of these three, so the -500s. So the X offsets. And we can hook both of these executions up to there. And with that, we can now press the plus key and we will start like zooming in. And if we press the minus key, we'll start zooming out just as easily as that. One last thing that you can do to set variables as well is you can make a variable collection. In some cases, you will need to do this. We can see, for instance, here, if we go to our simple camera director, we can set these interpolation values or even the boom offset itself. Let's just do the boom offset itself as an example. We can set that to be a variable reference. So the way that we would drive that instead would be going into gameplay, make a camera variable collection, call this something like basic cam vars. And generally these would be used when you don't want to have separate values per instance. These are more like global variables. So we can start making like effectively a data table of variables here. So in this case, that would be a vector 3D camera variable. Call this boom arm offset. And now that we've made that, we can go in here, we can choose that variable collection assets, and then we can choose the corresponding variable that we made. And now we can set that variable. And the wonderful thing is, unlike those parameters which you set on a per rig basis, which can be very powerful, we can use this variable across multiple rigs. So if we want the top-down camera, for instance, to use the exact same offset, which at that point it would be the same camera. But if you have two cameras that need the same offset but some other type of like behavior, this would be a good way to do it. So how do you set those? Well, instead of setting the camera rig parameter, what you do is you set a, in this case would be vector variable, and there you choose your variable collection and just the variable like that. And then we can set it, in this case, again, to the X value. Works essentially the same, but they'll just be more global values. So just to prove you how that works. Now the difference being is the default value for that variable will of course be 0. So we need to initially update it to actually give it its first value. But we can just go in here and give it a default value as well if we wanted to. So with that, the last thing to do that I promised that I would show you is how the occlusion thing works. So if I just like get this mesh over here and I go into my third person like top down, if I am occluded by any mesh, it will get the material that we set up for the occlusion for that specific camera. It'll only work for this specific camera if we go back into my normal third person camera and I actually like zoom out with that a lot. Because we set up the collision pushing, we won't look through it, we will just get pushed down beneath it. So our different cameras have very much different behavior with the environment as well. You can set up effectively as many cameras as you want within one collection of these rigs. And again, you can drive these with behavior trace, it seems like, as well. I might make a video on that in the future after I've played around with it a little bit more. But for now, I encourage you to play around with this and be creative with setting up your dynamic gameplay cameras. And a very big thank you to all my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help support the channel or get any of the project files in any of my tutorials, there's a link down below to the Patreon page to support me, or alternatively as a YouTube member. And of course, an extra massive thank you to my Cave Digger tier supporters, Sergey Thomas and Mauricio Farias. And my Cave Student tier supporters, Oiku and Earl Monsville Urno.